This is the morning brief from the Economic Times.
Downloading.
3, 2, 1.
Today's podcast is about the rise of startups dedicated to women's health. But let me first shock you with the kind of comments we get at the doctors. The comments are, were you up to some mischief? You're not maintaining sufficient hygiene. Are you married? What does your husband say? What will your parents say? I think it's a weight issue. You do not want children? Why? You want only one child. Why? And now you will probably understand why there are about 40 startups founded between 2018 and 2021 which realized there is a need for sensitivity, empathy, and non-judgmental attitude in a doctor's chamber where one is at their vulnerable most. I'm Devina Sengupta and you're listening to the Morning Brief. To know more about these startups dedicated to women's health, I spoke to Achitha Jacob, founder of Proactive for Her, a digital health platform for women, and ET's Indulekha Aravind, who tracked the rise of these companies and their increasing popularity. Indulekha, it was a very interesting story that you wrote about how suddenly we are seeing a lot of healthcare platforms dedicated to women mushrooming in India. And this is interesting because all of us have gone to doctors and at times faced judgment. And it's not just only gynac related problems, but when it comes to even lifestyle issues where doctors have to comment, then there's been a slight judgment attached to our lifestyles. What do you think the trigger was in seeing so many healthcare platforms dedicated to women come up?
This was clearly a space that needed to be tackled because, as you very accurately said, this is something that all of us have gone through either personally or through people we know. And not just that, there's also data to show that women's healthcare, both historically and systemically, is something that's been neglected. And when it's not, the focus invariably tends to be around maternity and childcare, whereas obviously women's bodies, women's needs are not always the same as a man's. So there needed to be solutions that are specific to women. This is a space that, as with many other things in the startup ecosystem, began developing in the West, and that's now starting to get reflected in India as well.
The word Femtech is attributed to Ida Tin, who founded fertility tracking app Clue in 2016 and came up with it to help male investors talk about female focused products.
We built an app where you can track your menstrual cycle and you can also track different symptoms that occur and get an insight about how it changes and how they change throughout their cycle. And you can use these insights to improve and adjust ways that you experience life in the future. We built a website that should become a one-stop shop for menstrual health information. We're trying to give people the power that comes with understanding their own bodies.
Without menstruation, none of us would be here.
And while Clue is all the rage in the West, where do the Indian counterparts stand? And what made someone like Achitha not go for a food or tech startup, which would have been far easier path to follow?
One of my big aha moments way back in 2017 was that, the issue around healthcare for women is not just clinical, it's also cultural, because the first step towards actually getting treated is to go to a doctor and to fundamentally believe that your health is important. And what we would see with dialysis patients in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, women with families wanting to save money for their families and not really coming forward. So, and myself personally, I thought that I was the one in my friend circle who didn't quite have the best access to doctors or wasn't quite proactive about my own health. But again, the ball dropped for me when I was sitting in Harvard Business School. I was talking to all of these wonderful women from the best institutes and the best corporates across the globe. And a lot of them actually had very suboptimal or sub disappointing experiences with their clinical journeys. And it was something that made me realize that across all boundaries, we see that women really have not come forward to ask for help or not found platforms where they can in fact ask for help.
What did you realize the customers wanted? Is it the cloak of privacy that is missing between a doctor and a patient? Or is it just a judgment factor? Or we need someone to keep prodding us, telling us that, okay, you know what? I understand this is your financial constraints, but your health is important for the benefit of your family in the long run.
One of the most common things I heard while I was speaking to, especially Indian women sitting in the US, is when they went to doctors in India, they would almost never be asked if they were sexually active and instead were asked if they were married. And it seemed to me there was so much unnecessary taboo and stigma around something as simple as being sexually active or something as commonplace as premarital sex.
And while certain subjects raise eyebrows in our society, even polycystic ovary syndrome or PCOS, which according to reports affects 20% of Indian women, are shrouded in judgment. Take the case of 40-year-old Nandini Sharma, who was suffering from PCOS, and this was her traumatic experience at the doctors.
Before I was able to conceive, I was going from corner to corner, trying out different gynecologists who could give me a solution. And I've experienced being scolded, chided, shooed away from the doctor's office that first go lose weight and then come, and then only I'll see you. The lack of that compassionate approach actually prolonged my treatment. I was very quickly put on pills, which unfortunately had a reverse reaction in my body. I put on excessive amount of weight. My plans to start a family were further delayed. It was only much later that I came across a good person, a good medical professional who guided me on how the situation is not to be feared and it can be managed.
Nandini is not an anomaly. There are several women who have spoken to us about their traumatic experience at the doctors or regarding an illness which is as common as a PCOS. There are success stories like Veera, which has raised $3 million from Sequoia Surge, and Proactive for her raised seed funding from Nexus Venture Partners.
Women want to trust their doctors and also want their doctors to be friends. So if your doctor begins your consultation with, "Are you married or are you unmarried?" you immediately know. You have a little bit of a red flag saying, "This is probably a doctor who will probably judge me if they know I'm sexually active before marriage." So we try really hard at Proactive to make sure that we're asking the right questions, we're explaining why we're asking these questions, and creating a safe space for women as soon as they enter a consultation room.
Indu, there was a very interesting quote from a Frost and Sullivan report in your story. It goes, Femtech startups are treated like stepchild of digital startups. Could you throw some light on this, please?
What the analyst was trying to highlight here was, the disparity, the huge disparity, in fact, which exists between digital health investments in general and the investment in women's health. So, what Frost and Sullivan was saying is that of the total funding in digital health from 2013 to 2020, it's about 7 years, women's health got just 3%, which is, it's like a drop in the ocean. And of that 3%, the majority, about 65%, went towards fertility, pregnancy, and maternity. And that right there is the problem. Firstly, women's health tends to get the short end of the stick. And when it doesn't, it becomes focused on childbirth, maternity, and everything related around that. I mean, this year, as we know, it's been this crazy year when it comes to investments, so many unicorns being created. So, up until August, around 20 billion had been raised across around more than 500 deals. But according to Traction data, Femtech startups raised just about $6.7 million, which is
Which
again
is nothing,
a sliver.
peanuts, actually. And also, again, taking a line from your story, I think you mentioned how women's annual medical expenses add up to around 500 billion globally, and only an estimated 4% of healthcare R&D is targeted at women's health issues. And this is according to a report by capital markets tracker PitchBook. When you say 4% of healthcare is only dedicated to women, and within that space, if everything goes into family planning methods and maternity, that means other areas, PCOD, PCOS, STDs, any other kind of the so-called taboo subjects, I don't think they have any takers.
Yeah, that's true. There's a report by the George Institute for Global Health, the India chapter, and they said, and I quote, a depressing fact in the Indian healthcare system is the remarkable lack of any data that can provide any level of gender specific analysis of disease burden. So I think that could be, in fact, a good starting point to tackle this problem, because unless we know the size of the problem, we will not have a better idea on how to solve it.
When you went to pitch for your company to investors, now while customer traction is building up in these femtech platforms, was it difficult to get the investors' attention?
There was not so much judgment as there was probably an unwillingness to appreciate how large the market is. I think a lot of folks said that we were looking at a fairly niche market. Now, how can um, a company that's targeting 50% of the population be niche is something that I can't possibly understand. The other reaction that we also saw was a lot of unawareness about issues that are actually quite common amongst women in India. And I think PCOS is now more talked about than it before was, but definitely other issues around sexual dysfunction, for example. One of the most popular programs that we've been running at Proactive is around vaginismus. Vaginismus is a condition where women are unable to have penetrative sex. And in a country like India, where you don't really have sex ed, there's so much of cultural shame, taboo, and stigma around, sexual pleasure. Women are not really coming forward to talk about sexual dysfunction. And we've had over 350 women completely organically register for our program. And that's been a great learning for us in terms of understanding how under the carpet these issues are.
So, very interesting. And how do you plan to take this ahead? I mean, are you now confident enough to, let's say, raise another round of funding, in the sense you say, okay, you know what? You all thought that this is not going to increase. Look at the expansion, look at the number of cases we have, look at the number of customers I'm getting. If you could throw some light on the customer traction of platforms like yours.
Absolutely. I think we've seen a lot of organic traction and only recently started investing in inorganic ads as well. But I think the space is ripe. We've had a lot of investors approach us for the next round of funding as well. And we're very excited. We see this happening sometime soon. All of our doctors are well trained, queer affirmative, body positive. And that's where we see our traction coming from in terms of both our own patients coming back to us. 1 in 3 patients actually come back to the platform in the last 6 months, as well as our patients referring their friends and family to the platform.
Indu, the fact that platforms are becoming so successful now in the last 2 years, actually, this is the second year of pandemic, we have seen a lot of us latching on to the digital platforms to discuss our health issues and not just COVID related. How different will platforms like Achita's and other femtech startups that you have spoken to in your story, how different will they be?
So, I mean, the differentiator for these platforms is that they are targeting women, right? The fact is also that the platforms, the femtech platforms that offer virtual consultations have definitely benefited from the pandemic as well. It's something that investors also mentioned, that it has acted as a kind of tailwind for their growth, because of COVID, we've all got more comfortable and more used to the idea of doing virtual consultations. Although that said, entrepreneurs, including Achitha, have mentioned that they will be looking at a model of possibly of combining both offline and online.
Absolutely, Indu. Completely agree.
Now, see, remember, even a couple of decades ago, women's health in India meant family planning and mother and child care.
क्योंकि जब माँ स्वस्थ रहेगी तभी घर स्वस्थ रहेगा और ये जिम्मेदारी पति पत्नी दोनों की है। और दूसरा बच्चा 3 साल बाद भी हो सकता है। इतनी सी बात की इतनी सी गोली, माला डी।
बस जब भी आप माँ बनना चाहें, इसका सेवन रोक दें। ये है सुरक्षित। ये आपके स्वास्थ्य और बच्चों की खुशियाँ दोनों के लिए लाभदायक है। एक दिन में एक गोली आपके जीवन को महका सकती है।
अपनाइए माला डी गर्भ निरोधक गोलियां ताकि आप और आपका परिवार रहे खुशियों से हरा भरा।
Now we have ads about female hygiene products, but they are not sufficient. How exactly do you market to women and reach out to them, especially those in tier 2 and tier 3 cities?
To be fair, we haven't yet advertised to tier 2 and tier 3 cities, though we have done corporate events with a lot of multinationals in their tier 2 and tier 3 city factories with their employees over there.
An important channel for these companies is through social media, especially Instagram, to drive these conversations and to kind of organically, some of them get converted to paying customers.
अगर वर्जिन हो तो क्या मेंस्ट्रुअल कप का इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं? Yes, if you menstruate, you can use a menstrual cup. It doesn't matter whether you're sexually active or not.
For tip number 6, I want to talk a little bit about vaginal discharge. And I know it's very uncomfortable and irritating for a lot of people. So if you do not like having discharge on your underwear, even though discharge is completely normal, you can use panty liners.
Okay, finally, I want to end the video by talking about 2 very important things that every single girl suffering from PCOS needs to know. The first, as I said earlier, is that this whole condition is not your fault.
In fact, another startup that I had spoken to, which is called My Ava, had started off as an Instagram handle because the founder, Evelyn, was struggling with PCOS herself and she wanted to start something to disseminate information, and it was kind of like a passion project, and that became a company.
Absolutely. Social media seems to have a larger reach than the regular channels of advertisements. And my final question, Achitha, for you is, do you have customers from, let's say, neighboring countries or outside latching onto your platform? It can't be easy anywhere anyhow.
So Devina, we currently serve only Indian customers because of regulations, but we do see ourselves establishing ourselves firmly in India before expanding abroad as well.
Thank you, Achitha and Indulekha, for this very interesting conversation. There is a Frost and Sullivan report that says although issues like PCOS, fibroid, and thyroid are often treated through medicines and surgeries, other women's health complications such as endometriosis, premenopause, menopause, mental health, and pelvic health remain largely unaddressed in the brick and mortar clinics. And this is where Femtech players in the country such as Niramai, PregBuddy, Celiscare, Periwinkle Technologies, Proactive for Her, amongst others, will bring about the change. I'm Devina Sengupta and you've been listening to The Morning Brief. This episode was edited and coordinated by Anjali Venugopalan. I hope you've enjoyed listening to the episode. Do send in your feedback to The Morning Brief at timesgroup.com and share the episode on your social media networks. The Morning Brief is every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Thank you for listening and have a nice day ahead. All clips used in this episode are owned by their respective owners. Credits are mentioned in the description.